Good day everyone. So just two video clips that I'll share with you today. It's a bit of a different format of video. I've done these sorts of formats before. Basically, I'm going to be engaging in a discussion in a response to Polyhedron. So this is just a discussion type video. Basically, in one of my videos a few days ago, I said I don't believe in tier lists, and there are reasons why I don't. And don't just look at the title and write a comment. The video goes into more detail why. But what we'll talk about today is why metas are essentially pointless. But before we do so, just keep in mind my comment section's got a very strict anti-spam and sort of anti-swear word and so on filter. Generally, if you're not a channel sub or if I don't really recognize you and your comments out for review, I kind of ignore it. And then of course links are blocked, even no matter how well intentioned. So don't spam me links, I just ignore it. I never ever click on it. So let's get to the discussion. What does meta even mean? And I want to sort of, I'm not really going to reference this, but I want to reference this part here that you said, Polyhedron. Basically, you've said, and this is something I've also said before as well, what on earth does meta even mean in Genshin Impact? You might go to Kaching mains and theory crafting, but most of the time they'll just be like, well, we assume a certain amount of artifact subset substats, we assume Z0 5 stars. It's like, yeah, well, that's also not really that kind of useful all the time. And then you have people like I Went to Lose Gaming, Sikapoko, Genshin YouTuber, they've got their own tier list, and it's kind of a big mess. It's like, and I think you point out quite correctly here, we don't have a pro league or something to sort of look at some of these things. And yeah, if you do sort of look at a couple of other things as well, you've made an interesting point here that there are not even C6 whales, or there are C6 whales who can barely clear the abyss, and also give my opinion on that. But the whole point about meta boils down to two things. Genshin Impact, firstly, is a gacha game, which is very problematic. So if Genshin had been a game where the developers had given, and I think this is the right way that it should have gone, if they had given all the characters in the game and they made them available to everyone for free at C0 only, Genshin would have been very interesting to talk from a meta perspective. Unfortunately, we're in this terrible situation where you get a very few select characters for free and the rest you essentially have to gamble on. So this leads to a big problem. You've got a lot of variation just from people that are purely free to play that have been playing since day one. The one guy gets Ganyu with an R3 Amos bow, the other one literally loses all their 50-50s, like my good friend Shadow, which some of you channel subs, you might have seen him from time to time on some of the videos. He is literally, my friend, literally almost has not won any single 50-50, and I'm not talking just about the wishes, I'm also talking about the standard banner. He literally has lost so many 50-50s, it is unbelievable, and he's like very well progressed in the game. So compare him against someone like F2P God from MTAShed, the amount of variance just like makes any sort of real meta discussion between the two. It's just like you can just see the one account's just like way better than the other. It's just insane. So you get that variation between accounts, but you also get another problem. You've also got a lot of player variation as well in terms of their skill, in terms of their knowledge. People always joke that you need a PhD in elemental gauge theory. Honestly, it's not that difficult. I don't know why people hype it up. It's really easy. If you just need to keep track of a couple of separate things, but the understanding from the more difficult stuff in theory crafting, difficult in air quotes, and the sort of general player base not even knowing that, oh, I can snapshot certain abilities and I cannot snapshot others, is also mind-blowing. So this leads us to a very weird situation. Accounts are not balanced, characters aren't balanced because of account variance, player skill isn't balanced, and yeah, this game is casual. There's no competitive gaming here. So defining a meta is very difficult, and that it's also difficult to define that meta when the goal is to just clear the spiral abyss in under 7 minutes, or to get 36 stars. And you can get your 36 stars in any way you wish. You can restart, you can craft a specific team that can target a free star on a specific floor, so you don't even need to do all of it concurrently. There's so much variation in terms of getting the end goal. It then essentially boils down to being a meta of convenience. So this is the first clip that I want to share. So basically, look at what's going to happen here in the background. you'll see here I've got Bennett, Kujosara, Raiden, and Sucrose because I don't have Kazuha. Otherwise, I would have definitely put in Kazuha here. But look what is happening in the background. Essentially, what we're doing is we're grouping up the enemies, we're disrupting them, we're sort of boosting Raiden to just be, you know, getting 52k autos and stuff. It's just insane. So what's happened here is we've done like quite a bit of damage in a short time span because it was convenient. We had a character that grouped up everyone, we had a character that boosted our attack to an insane level. So the convenience factor makes it easier and more comfortable to clear, so there's a greater certainty of outcome even if you're an F2P player. Now contrast this to, and this is the point that you've made here, there are C6 whales who can barely clear the abyss. Contrast this to now someone that's got a C6 R5 Ayaka and a C6 R5 Shenhe. And they're just going to, you can see they're just going to now start playing the abyss, and look at the mess that's going to happen right now. Because what happens, you don't have a unit now that can group up the enemies. You can see there's already immediately a gameplay mistake that's been made here. The enemies aren't all sort of, they haven't been brought in closer. Ayaka's missing her elemental burst. It is just a big mess. And of course, Shenhe, I think, is one of the most difficult characters to properly get the most value out of. She's a very high skilled character, not just in terms of using, but building and sort of in team rotations and so on. So on the one hand, you've got the equivalent, let's just quickly go forward, right here, you've got the equivalent of the F2P, Giga Chat, Tryhard, I only do what the Fury Crafters say guy, and he's got a comfortable clearing time. You've got the C6 whale that does not know how to, by the way I designed this deliberately, that does not know how to use the cooldowns of these very, very overpowered characters, C6 Ayaka and C6 Shenhe. And at the end of the day, what it sort of means is that Genshin Impact becomes a meta, like I said, of convenience. What are the characters that in a given situation can make it as easy as possible to clear? And obviously this is where stuff like account strength can also make a bit of a difference. So if you've got characters that can pretty much one-shot everything, it's a lot easier. Whereas if you've just got a pure free-to-play game, well, you've got to still like work a bit harder, but it certainly is possible. And that is why a lot of people, I think, tend to focus more on the free-to-play side, because it's more accessible. I mean, who's got the money really to get a C6 Shenhe and Ayaka unless you're a multimillionaire? I mean, let's just be honest there. So this is why Fury Crafters champion the free-to-play side, the accessible side, the thing that we all can agree to, but it's not really that simple. And this is a chart that I've explained as well. The problem that you've got is certain characters are meta because their effectiveness in terms of their floor and their ceiling just pushes that team to have a higher floor. So it doesn't matter what the margin for error is on your skill. You can have like very bad skill. The very fact of the matter is if a character automatically groups up all the enemies, automatically buffs your entire team, extends that buff via snapshotting with Xiangling beyond that original ability's duration, which is a very unhealthy mechanic, by the way. These are the things that raise the floor and hence reduces the variability of outcomes induced by the sort of variability in skill. And that essentially is the weird mix we get where people are like, well, because these characters have a high floor and effectively you don't need as much skill to pull them off, they're kind of like the best to play and hence they are meta. That's kind of the whole point in the argument. So when a character like Miko comes in who demands a high skill, who's got like a high skill ceiling as well, it's always easier to say, well, yeah, she doesn't have iframes, you know, that's my problem. And then you've got, and then people are like just unhappy about Yai. Why do I need to pull for this from a meta perspective when another character with half the skill gives me a greater floor? And this is sort of how discussions go, and it's always kind of funny because some people have said that stuff like the Ocean Youth clam sets and healing in general kind of devalues the game, and yet MiHoYo is always busy reducing the enemies and nerfing them for us in terms of being hit and so on. They've done it a couple of times, which just shows you as well that the general audience in this game doesn't have the required skill to, for instance, play this game without any healing. For instance, once you are dead, you can't reset the abyss. If you reset on floor 3, you start again at floor 12. They'll never design it like that. Players do not have that requisite skill, and that's why we've got this mix mash of a meta. We don't have a pro league. You've put it, yeah, that's also a very nice anchor point for balance, but yeah, this is a casual game. And I think this is why the meta is always so iffy, and this is why, in my opinion, I don't think tier lists are good for guiding you. They're good for giving you a sense of what characters work and what characters tend to work in more teams. I think if you build a tier list based off of how many teams a character can enable effectively, then a tier list like that would probably be more valuable. That's why you also have a mix and tier list where a lot of people focus on the damage output, and yet they put support characters at the top because they enable more. And I think it's almost like the wrong way around. You should have a tier list, and the tier list should be, how do you enable the most, not do the most damage, because a damage dealer, for instance, like Xiangling, is very easily replaceable, and I've said this many times. And by the same token, other damage dealers can also be very easily replaced with Xiangling. The argument goes both ways, let's be clear about it. But a character like Bennett, being Bennett, just enables way more than many of the other characters, and being able to enable more teams is ultimately what should push you up to being more meta, because if you can enable more teams, then the account variance plays less of a role. The skill variance can also play less of a role. And yeah, that is just my sort of take. I think we've got a big mix mash of meta. It's always going to be controversial. It's always going to be very messy. It's not always going to work out. It's always going to lead to bun fights. So at the end of the day, just pick your favorite wife or favorite husband or whatever you want. Enjoy the game, and do understand that Genshin Impact is 90% not the Abyss. And if you're only worried about the final bit of 50 or 150 Primo Gems you get every 2 weeks, which is about 10 Primo Gems a day, then don't worry too much about it. The odds are you are still not going to get the next great upcoming character, because MiHoYo introduced a goddamn gacha and it ruins the game. So yeah, how would I have changed Genshin Impact? I would have given all the characters at C0, and then I would have basically said 32,000 Primo Gems, or whatever the number is that you want. Let's say 24,000. You use 24,000 Primo Gems, you buy a character, you get the next tier or the next constellation, and if people are whales, they can then buy the next tier ahead of time, and basically that would have been way more sensible than the stupid gambling mechanic. I think the gacha element, I understand why it works. I understand why it's necessary in some Asian markets. I understand that there are implications towards putting up a paid game as opposed to a free-to-play game. There are lots of these arguments and nuances in the real world that I truly get. At the end of the day, the gacha aspect is probably what ruins balance more in Genshin Impact, and it's also it also leads to this unhealthy thing that we're not allowed to touch or nerf or tweak characters, which at the end of the day also sets a precedent for how future characters should be created, and that also could lead to an unhealthy game state. And I think MiHoYo is trying their best to ensure that you've got a fairly good set of complementary and substitutable characters in any given circumstance. Some characters are a bit more niche, some are a bit more general, and essentially the only difference between them is the story. So yeah, hopefully MiHoYo can get that story like they've done with the Inazuma Festival. And yeah, that's about all that I've got to say. Polyhedron, if you've been sticking around, I'll approve your comments. Here you go. There you go. Sorry for not approving it sooner. And for you guys that are spamming me links, I will delete it. And thank you everyone for watching. Cheers.